My guest today is Dr. Donald Hoffman, a professor in the Department of Cognitive Sciences at the University of California, Irvine. He's a proponent of conscious realism, which holds that consciousness is fundamental and that space-time is just a user interface that is specific to our species. His book, The Case Against Reality, was released in August of 2019, and it is absolutely a must-read for anyone who's interested in this topic. Hey, Dr. Hoffman, how are you?
Good. How about you, Derek?
I'm wonderful. It's so good of you to join this. I can't tell you how thrilled I am that you took the time out of your day and solving the universe to do this.
Well, my pleasure. Thanks for doing this.
I'd like to start by saying that your book, The Case Against Reality, was absolutely fascinating. It sent me down a wormhole that I can't even get you started on. You've been trying to solve the hard problem of consciousness, and I was hoping that you could just take a few minutes to explain to my audience what the hard problem of consciousness is and kind of the basic tenets of your theory and where you're going with it.
Right. Like many great problems in science, it's sort of easy to say what the problem is. We have what looks to be a physical body with, your body weighs something. You have a mass, you have a position, you have a velocity, you have all these things that, a rock has. So you seem to be a physical object. And on the other hand, you have other things that seem to be true about you. For example, you have emotions, you feel love, you have a headache, you taste the taste of chocolate, you have that experience, you experience the color of red. And these don't seem to be things that are obviously physical. So, what is the momentum of love or the mass of love or the position of love? Your beliefs. Can you point in space to where your beliefs exist? Do they have a weight? Do they have a velocity? Do they have a spin? Do they have a charge? It just on the face of it, we have an interesting issue that we seem to be a composite of a physical body with physical properties like mass, position, momentum, spin, energy, and so forth. And then we seem to have these other things that, at least at first blush, don't seem to be physical, like the experience of the feeling of love. What is the mass of a love? Where is its position? And so the hard problem of consciousness is the scientific problem of trying to come up with a scientific theory that explains how emotions like love, how sensory experiences like seeing colors and smelling tastes, smells like, the smell of chocolate or tasting the chocolate, how these kinds of things can be put together into one coherent and rigorous scientific worldview. That's the hard problem of consciousness. And so far we failed.
So you're trying a different approach than what the physicalists have. And the physicalists basically say that consciousness is either a product of feedback loops in our brain or the accident of evolution. You're starting from a different approach. Tell us about that approach.
Right. So most of my colleagues are physicalists, and so they are saying, look, we've had great success with a physicalist framework in science for centuries, at least since Galileo, Newton. Physicalism has been an incredibly powerful framework and is responsible for the technology that we're using today to talk by Zoom and so forth. So it's incredibly powerful, and so there is an obvious and natural inclination to say, look, it's worked in the past. Let's continue to try to come up with theories in which space-time and physical objects like, elementary particles, protons, neutrons, quarks, gluons, leptons, these things are the fundamental elements of the universe. That's what's real. Their laws and their existence is what's real. And within that framework, we have to try to then figure out what it means to have the experience of the feeling of love or the smell of chocolate or the feeling of a headache. So we'll just have to explain it in that framework. And so, sure, that's a reasonable strategy to say it's worked so far. It's worked for centuries. Look where it's taken us. Why not have it take on the problem of consciousness as well from that framework? So, we can talk about it, but so far there are no physicalist theories that can account for even one specific conscious experience, say the taste of vanilla. There's no physicalist theory that can say precisely what physical system or physical properties or physical dynamics um, must be or give rise to the taste of vanilla, and why that physical system, those physical properties, that dynamics could not possibly be the taste of chocolate. There's nothing on the table for even one specific conscious experience. So that's another reason why we call it the hard problem. It's hard because we don't have anything on the table that works. So, and that's not because these people are dumb. To the contrary, I'm friends with many of the physicalists who are working on this. They're brilliant, dedicated researchers. This problem is just plain hard, and a physicalist framework has just so far failed to give any concrete solutions to even one specific conscious experience. So just thinking about it as a scientist, as just a search strategy, right? We're all searching for the answer to this problem. But 99% of us are searching in one part of the search space. We're all searching with physicalism as the starting framework and trying to boot up consciousness. Well, of course, some people should be doing that. Absolutely. But all of us? Absolutely not. Some of us should be looking elsewhere, because it's just dumb to put all of if you're searching for something, you don't know where to find it, you shouldn't just search in one, if you've lost your glasses, you don't just keep going to the bathroom and looking in the bathroom. You're going to have to look around the house if you don't find it in the bathroom. So that's what I'm doing. I've stepped out of the bathroom and I'm looking around the rest of the house. And so one thing I'm proposing is that, for reasons that we can talk about, I think that the physicalist framework has fundamental limitations, and that physicalism itself points to these limitations. And so I'm proposing that let's start with a new framework in which consciousness itself is fundamental. And we have to have a mathematically precise theory of consciousness and its properties and how its dynamics. So it's got to be all mathematically precise. And then the goal there is, again, a unified scientific worldview. So I would then have to explain how, if I have a mathematical model in which consciousness is fundamental, how do I explain space-time, physical objects, microphysical particles like quarks and leptons and gluons and so forth? And how do I explain the laws of physics and also evolution by natural selection? So all of the current successes of a physicalist science need to be re-understood from a different framework in which consciousness is fundamental, not the physical world. So that's also a tall order, right? So that no matter what happens here, it's going to be a radical new step forward. So that's the fun part for a scientist.
Right. So you've started the ball rolling with your theory. What kind of progress have you made?
Well, some good progress in the following sense, that we've published a first proposal for a precise mathematical model of consciousness. Very, very straightforward. The mathematics is completely precise. And we're working now on it. It's effectively, if you want to think about it intuitively, it's like a vast social network is the proposal, like Twitter, right? The Twitterverse, there's tens of millions of Twitter users, millions of tweets, lots of stuff trending, but it's a big social network. And there's all these conscious entities, the Twitter users, that are interacting. They're tweeting and following and so forth. And so that's the idea, that there are these things, I call them conscious agents, and they're effectively interacting by sharing experiences and affecting each other's conscious experiences. That's sort of the top level idea, just like a vast social network. But social networks, as you can imagine, are quite complicated, right? You can have, as we've seen, social networks allow disinformation to flow very, very easily. There's all sorts of interesting dynamics that happen with social networks. The mathematics of this is fairly new. It's called dynamics on graphs. It's very, very difficult mathematics. And so that's what we're having to do, is start to really tool up and learn to use this. And a lot of results are not known in the dynamics of graphs. So this is quite exciting. So we're looking at that. And another aspect of it is then, how do we find how what we call space-time and the laws of physics arise, right? Because they're not fundamental in this anymore. Space and time are not fundamental. Conscious agents, which are not in space and time, and that's maybe hard for people to wrap their heads around. I'm saying we have to really think out of the box here. I'm not talking about conscious entities inside space and time. I'm talking about conscious entities prior to space and time. And space and time then are much like visualization tools, like virtual reality headsets that some conscious agents use to help them understand this vast network of other conscious agents and to interact with it. Like in the Twitterverse, right, with tens of millions of users, billions of tweets, there's no way that you could read all the tweets or interact with all the users. So if you wanted to understand like what's happening in New York versus California, what's happening in the US versus Europe, you would like to have some kind of data compression visualization tool, like hopefully something really nice, a virtual reality headset that you could put on with simple eye candy that you can understand, colorful objects doing certain things, changing shapes, moving and so forth, that lets you say, oh, that's what's trending in New York, and notice how different it is from what's happening in California. So, but then you could zoom in. I want to talk, to this particular, or listen to the tweets of this particular user. Now I want to zoom back and see what's trending in all of Asia, right? So that's what you want. And that's what I claim what we call the physical world, space and time is. It's just our little headset. It's a visualization tool that allows us to interact with this vast social network. So that's the top level idea. The hard science behind that will be to say, what is the precise mapping between the dynamics of consciousness and what we call space and time and the laws of physics? Just like if I were a software engineer and you asked me, please, could you make a virtual reality tool to help me visualize the Twitterverse? Well, surely I can do that, but there's going to be some hard work, and I'm going to have a particular mapping between what's trending, what's happening in the Twitterverse, and what I show you in your little headset, right, in the virtual reality headset. So that's what I'm working on right now. Is the nice thing is, all of our science for the last several centuries, almost all of it has been studying our headset. So science, from this point of view, space and time is just the format of our headset. So all of space-time science, which is pretty much all of science, 99% of science has been about what happens inside space and time. All of that has been an incredibly detailed study of the format of our headset. And that's really important, because if we're going to take the first step of science outside the headset, like proposing this realm of conscious agents and their interactions, and proposing that what we see in space and time is just a headset, virtual reality for that, then I have to show how I project the dynamics of consciousness into the headset to get back to current physics. So all of the current physics, all the current science is a constraint on my deeper theory. Whatever my deeper theory is, it has to look like current science. It has to give back exactly the right laws of physics and so forth, or generalizations, but that would be great if I could get even generalizations. But the current physics is, I'm not throwing it away. To the contrary, it's a incredibly hard constraint on whatever I propose that's beyond space and time.
So in a sense, you're trying to reverse engineer space-time from consciousness. Right. That's right. Just so outside of the box that it's amazing to me. It's so hard to wrap my mind around.
Well, some physicists are starting to take the first steps themselves. Now they're not motivated by this consciousness project, as far as I know, but many physicists have realized that space-time cannot be fundamental just on physical grounds, right? So they've realized that when you put quantum theory and special relativity together, and gravity, especially gravity with quantum theory, you get problems that arise that show you that space-time cannot be fundamental, that there's got to be a deeper structure. And so the physicists, and we can go into that, I'll just say at top level, because people might wonder how in the world could that be? So just at top level. In quantum theory, you have a measuring system. Like if you want to measure the position of something, you need to have some device to measure the position, say, of an electron. So you have the observing system, the measuring apparatus, and the system that you're observing, like the electron or something like that. And in quantum theory, the more precise that you want to make the measurement, the more complex, the more degrees of freedom the apparatus has to have. So it has to be more complex, more degrees of freedom. And it turns out, so if you want to do a measurement of, say, the position of an electron in a finite space like this room, then you put the apparatus in there, but you need to keep adding more and more degrees of freedom to it. it turns out as a result, it's getting more and more mass. And at some point, if you want to get high precision, you'll have so much mass that you'll collapse the whole room into a black hole.
That's a problem for your research.
Yeah, you die. So, and you've destroyed the measurement. And if you're frustrated and you say, well, I'm going to just make it more and more complex, or put more and more energy into the system, the black hole just gets bigger and bigger. So the problem doesn't go away, it just gets worse. And so what this means is that when you put quantum theory and gravity together, it means that there are no local observables in space-time. That's the key. No local observables in space-time. And that's not joking. That is a serious, serious problem. It means that space-time itself ceases to make sense at a certain scale, roughly 10 to the minus 33 centimeters, the Planck scale. It is not that there are pixels of space and time. It's not like there's smallest units. You can show pretty quickly that that's not the case. That would violate Lorentz invariance. But it's rather that space-time itself as a coherent concept ceases to exist. And so we need to let go of space-time. It's not fundamental. And so physicists, and many physicists recognize this. Nima Arkani-Hamed at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, Ed Witten, David Gross, and now I've seen some papers recently where Juan Maldacena is working with Nima Arkani-Hamed. There's the whole group of them that are working, recognizing that they need to find something beyond space-time and beyond quantum theory. So there is no space, there is no time, there is no quantum theory, there are no Hilbert spaces, and they're finding these structures beyond space-time that can give rise to space-time, that can give rise to what we call particles in space-time. This deeper realm, there's no particles, there's nothing like that. It's really quite interesting. So physicists are also trying to reverse engineer space-time to try to find something deeper. I'm hoping to meet them in the middle, because what they're doing is they're starting with space-time. Their own theories are saying space-time has had a good ride. For centuries, it's been great, but it's over. And it's up to us. This is the generation that gets to overthrow space-time and find what's deeper. Hey, what could be more fun, right? Space-time did it for 2 or 3 centuries. We're the generation that gets to find the next new thing that goes beyond space-time. That's incredible. So it's not a problem. This is just like a real opportunity. And they're finding these amazing structures, but they don't know what they're about, right? So there are these structures, but what process is giving rise to these structures? I mean, there's no ideas about it. So just here are these structures. What I'm hoping to show is that the process that gives rise to these structures is this vast social network of conscious agents. And what they're seeing is not the details of this network and its dynamics. They're seeing sort of like the global behavior, the long-term behaviors, more technically, the asymptotic behavior of this dynamical system of conscious agents. So that's the high-level idea that I'm pursuing. And that high-level idea can be cashed out in precise mathematics, and that's what I'm working on with my team right now, is to try to find the exact way of looking at the asymptotic dynamics of this graph dynamics of this social network dynamics, and show that how it maps into these structures like the cosmological polytope and the amplitude-hedron that the mathematical physicists are finding. If we can do that, then what happens is we can start with a theory of consciousness, this network, like vast social network notion of conscious agents, go through the asymptotics to the structures that the physicists are finding, like the amplitude-hedron. And then from that, they show us how we can get space and time and particles and quantum theory arising from that. So then we could actually reverse engineer the whole space-time interface. And the thing about this is every time we make a new advance in our understanding of physics, like when Maxwell wrote down the laws of electrodynamics, Maxwell's equations, how electricity and magnetism work. That's why we're talking today. The way I mean, it's Maxwell's equations. It's effectively miracles from the point of view of someone in 1800. What we're doing right now is a miracle, right?
Absolutely.
Well, it's a miracle because we understood nature at a much, much deeper level with mathematical precision. Well, what we've got right now, I think, will look like child's play compared to if we can reverse engineer space-time. We can get around space-time. We can actually change perhaps the parameters of space-time. That's going to be incredible. So this is really quite fun stuff.
So before I get to my next question, I want to tell you why I like your theory so much. I had been on the kind of consciousness kick where I was going down the wormhole, and I read Annika Harris's book, and I got into Stuart Hameroff and Sir Robert Penrose, or Roger Penrose. And, you know, they talk about microtubules and things like that, but it always bothered me because all we see is light. We see light, and light doesn't really form a pattern until it's observed. So if you can't observe it, those microtubules can't really be there. And that's why when I discovered your theory, I was like, that makes a lot more sense. And so I'm really glad that you're exploring this. In your book, you write that if your theory is correct, the distinction that we make between the living and the non-living might eventually be blurred. I was shocked to read those words from, you know, a serious scientist that focuses on real science. But I understand what you're saying, and you use that VR volleyball analysis in the past. But for the benefit of my audience, I was hoping you could explain what you mean by this.
Right. The way we typically think about things is, if I ask you what's alive and what's not, would we say, well, look at that rock. The rock clearly is not alive. An electron clearly is not alive. Virus, well, who knows? Maybe it's alive, maybe it's not. A bacterium, yes, probably alive, but surely it's not conscious. An ant, yeah, an ant is alive. I don't know if it's conscious, but you know, who knows? By the time we get to a monkey, yeah, surely it's alive and conscious and so forth. Well, what are we doing? From my point of view, space and time are not fundamental. They're just a headset. They're just a visualization tool. And so what do you do with a visualization tool? If I have a visualization tool for like the Twitterverse, I'm going to be ignoring most of the Twitter users, their detailed tweets. I can't, my headset's not going to show that. I may focus in on, you know, on Joe in Brooklyn and his particular tweet. I'm zooming in, I read Joe's tweet, but now I zoom back out and I'm representing all the other Twitter users across New York State with some symbol that maybe it looks like a rock. Well, from the point of view of my headset, they just look like a dumb, stupid symbol. But that's not because they're not conscious and they're not Twitter users. It's because a headset, a visualization tool, is necessarily giving up. It's giving up because it's saying the whole point is you can't individually see all the Twitter users. So I'm going to take all those Twitter users and put them in some really dumb symbol just to give you a broad notion. But so that's what, when we see rocks and so forth, that's not an insight into the nature of reality. That's our headset giving up. So this is a completely different point of view. And there's two aspects of it that are really important. Most of us think that we've been shaped by evolution to see the truth. I see a stupid looking rock. That's because what exists in reality is a stupid rock that has no consciousness, it has no life. But there's a different point of view that says, no, we've not been shaped to see the truth. We've been shaped with a virtual reality headset that has been designed to dumb things down so that we can deal with it, because we'd be overwhelmed. So if things look dumb to us, it's not because the reality is dumb, it's because our interface dumbed things down. And so what looks to us like a principal distinction between living and non-living is an artifact of the data format of our headset. And so this is a cautionary tale. We have to be very, very careful. If we start thinking this way, that space and time and the objects that we see are absolutely not veridical representations of what really exists in nature. They're a particular kind of format of a headset that we happen to evolve. This is now I'm putting on the evolutionary, headset framework on this. From that point of view, it's just that we have this user interface, and the user interface necessarily dumbs certain things down. So that's why things look non-living. But if this idea that consciousness is fundamental, not only is life everywhere, but consciousness is everywhere, right? So consciousness, so I'm not saying a rock is conscious. Just like so I'm not saying that, the pixels on your desktop are conscious or anything. I'm not saying that. So it's not a sort of a panpsychist view in which I'm saying individual physical objects are conscious. I'm saying the consciousness are in these conscious agents that are outside of space and time. When I look at you, or you look at me, you don't actually see my consciousness. You see a body. You see a head, two arms, legs, and so forth. You see eyes. You see my expressions. You hear my voice. You infer that you're interacting with a conscious being. But strictly speaking, the symbol that I see right now is just my symbol. I see a body. That body actually disappears when I close my eyes and walk away. The body I see no longer exists. Presumably, your consciousness continues to exist. And so, and we see this all the time. If you look at your own face in the mirror, you know firsthand what you see in the mirror, the skin, hair, and eyes, is trivial compared to the real you, your hopes, your fears, your aspirations, your love of music. All the stuff that you cannot see in the mirror is hidden behind this silly, simple little icon that we call the human face or the human body. You know firsthand that the face is a trivial icon compared to the rich world that's hidden behind it. And so when I look at you, I create an icon of a person, of a body and a face. That's not you. That's my dumbed down, really poor symbol. Your whole realm of conscious experience is this vast, complicated realm that I can't directly see. I can only see my little symbol. So that's sort of the point. We have to completely change our worldview. And that's what's so jarring here, I think, for a lot of people. It's hard to grasp what I'm saying. We don't see the truth. Our perceptions are not a window on reality as it is. It's a virtual reality headset that is a particular data format that's hiding the truth and is just guiding our actions. And when you think about it that way, then what we thought was the principal distinction between living and non-living, conscious and unconscious, becomes, we realize that's an artifact of the particular format of our headset.
The piece that really struck me in your book was the Jewel Beetle, how it almost went extinct because it was actually trying to mate with the bottle that looked like the female Jewel Beetle, because evolution, created a similar style, and this thing just saw like a brown lumpy shape and tried to mate with it.
That's right. So I mean, it's quite remarkable that the Jewel Beetles had successfully mated for, who knows, hundreds of thousands of years, presumably, and so you would think that, well, the male beetles must surely know what a female Jewel Beetle is. And it turned out apparently they just had a simple trick or hack. A female is just anything that's dimpled, glossy, and brown, right? That turns out they have these the wing casings are glossy. They have little dimples in them, and they're a certain color of brown. And it turns out if you just showed them like a beer bottle, which happens to be dimpled, glossy, and brown, but bigger than a normal Jewel Beetle, that was more interesting than a regular female. So somehow bigger was better. Right, that seemed to be part of their heuristic, and so that, again, from just an evolutionary point of view, by the way, it's a theorem of evolution that the probability that you're shaped to see the truth is 0. Probability you're shaped not to see the truth is 1. We're shaped to have user interfaces that hide the truth and just give us eye candy that keeps us alive. That's what evolution does. That's a theorem of the theory.
Now,
so that includes space-time.
Just a question on these symbols. So let's say that you're out there in Irvine in California and you draw a picture of a house, for instance, on a napkin, and you mail it to me in Wake Forest, North Carolina. If I receive that, I'll probably recognize that as a house, which means we share the same symbol. How does that work in your opinion?
Right. So this raises an interesting, a very, very important point, and that is different conscious agents may share similar user interfaces. So if we share similar user interfaces, then we can have the feeling that we're communicating and understanding each other. What's really quite intriguing, right? By the way, that's different from the standard view, right? The standard view is space and time are real. The moon is real. It exists even if no one is looking. When you and I both look up and we see the moon, we're seeing something that would exist even if no one looked, and it's been there for 4 or 5 billion years. And so the reason we can agree is because we're all in contact with the same truth. The moon and space and time really do exist. I'm saying that whole framework is gone. You have your headset, I have my headset. So it's more like, suppose we go to a VR arcade to play virtual tennis. So you put on your headset and bodysuit, I put on my headset and bodysuit, and we find ourselves immersed in a tennis court, a virtual tennis court with a net, and I've got a green tennis ball. I can hit the green tennis ball, and you can talk with me about the green tennis ball that I hit to you. You can say the green tennis ball, you served a fault. So you didn't get it in the service area, so you have to serve it up. So, and we can both agree that I didn't serve the tennis ball into the right service area, or I hit it out of bounds. And so we can play a game, we can both agree, and we can both agree who won the point and who wins the set. Is there really a tennis ball? No, there is no tennis ball. I see it when I look, but that's only because certain pixels are being sprayed to my headset, and I'm creating the virtual tennis ball that I perceive. My partner is creating his virtual tennis ball. It's just because there is a coordination between what we're seeing in our headsets that we can play the virtual reality game. I'm saying that's true about everyday life. We are all talking as though we're all seeing the same thing, just like the virtual reality people playing with the tennis ball, the VR tennis ball. You look at the moon, I look at the moon. The moon I perceive is the one I create when I look. The moon you perceive is the one you create when you look. Whatever the objective reality is, it doesn't even involve space and time, much less the moon. So there's this interesting issue that it could be that we think that we're agreeing, and we could be disagreeing. Our perceptions could be wildly differing. And we do have some evidence that that happens. 4% of us we know have something called synesthesia, where their perceptions can be dramatically different from the rest of us. Just one example, a guy named Michael Watson, everything he tasted with his tongue, he felt as a three-dimensional object in front of him, that he could feel the shape, the temperature, the texture, the weight of it. He felt it in three, it's really palpable. So mint on his tongue felt like a tall, cold, smooth column of glass. He felt it with his hands.
That blew my mind. That blew my mind.
It's crazy. From an evolutionary point of view, though, it's to be expected. From an evolutionary point of view, evolution's not done with us. We're not the final product. We're just another variation. And so evolution is mutating us and giving us new kinds of sensory systems. And Michael Watson's sensory system may have been better. I mean, it could be passed on, and pretty soon, in 100 years or 1,000 years, 90% of us have that kind of sensory system. But that leaves open the very interesting question. How do I know that your world of experiences is in any way similar to mine? We can both talk about the red apple. We can both talk about the full moon. But the language is just the language. How do I know that you're not, I'll call this extreme synesthesia, right? Michael Watson is a case of real synesthesia, but let's think about this possibility of extreme synesthesia, that if I could get inside your consciousness and experience your world, I might say, I have never had anything like any of the experiences you're having, ever in my life. That's what I would call extreme synesthesia. And yet, we could still be coordinated. And I would love for someone to build a VR game that does this, to really blow people's minds. So you bring in a bunch of people to the game. They each put on their own headset and bodysuit. And one guy thinks he's playing Grand Theft Auto in VR. Another guy thinks he's playing Super Mario, and so forth. But they're all playing against each other. So it's a multiplayer game. One guy thinks that everybody's playing Grand Theft Auto. The other guy thinks everybody's playing Super Mario. So there's 5 or 6 of them. And in fact, all of them are playing in utterly different games. But I do something to do something Grand Theft Auto that gets translated into some other action in Super Mario Brothers. And so we have the illusion that we're all playing the same game. Then, so you have everybody play, and then you say, now get out and move to the next station to put on that headset. And then you find out to your amazement that everybody was playing a completely different game. That should be possible. And so that's what I would call extreme synesthesia. And I see no reason why that can't be. So that then has all sorts of implications. One is for science. What does it mean most of my scientific friends will talk about science being third-person science, right? And what they mean is there is an objective physical world. I mean, there is this electron, say, and you can measure its spin, I can measure its spin, we can agree. Or the position of the moon. There is a real moon. So if you more classical physics, then we can have a third-person measurement. It's an objective measurement. And I'm saying that doesn't work. You have your own VR headset. I have my headset. We have to understand in science, what are we doing? We're coordinating between what I measure in my headset and what you're measuring in your headset. And there may be this case of extreme synesthesia where all of your experiences are utterly different from all of my experiences. And yet we can seem to communicate. I could communicate with Michael Watson. People could communicate with him even though he was synesthetic. And that's the same thing with synesthesia. So that's a really interesting and aspect of this whole thing.
So just changing directions just a little bit. How do you feel about the Global Consciousness Project? Obviously, you're doing a lot of studies in consciousness. There's been some studies that maybe, consciousness has some kind of effect on physical reality, things like random number generators and things like that around major events and things that seem to capture the public interest. Should we take that seriously? And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think about it in the same way that think around, say, around 1850 or something like that. We're beginning to understand about electricity and magnetism. We're just beginning to understand, and someone says, this seems to be a deep, deep, powerful force. I bet that this force can allow me to find out almost immediately what someone is saying on the other side of the earth. Well, it turns out that that's true, but it's not trivial. We had to do a ton. You had to understand electricity and magnetism in great detail, and then we found out that you had to use the laws very, very carefully to devise things like iPhones and satellite systems. In other words, it is true, but it's not trivial, and it's going to take a long time. So the idea that consciousness is fundamental and that it may lead to new ways of interacting that from the current point of view look magical, I think that's true. But it's not going to be a trivial, typically, right? If someone said, let's use electricity and magnetism and hold our hands, everybody grab a magnet, hold your hands, and maybe we will get to find out what people are thinking on the other side of the world. That won't work. It's not because electricity and magnetism can't do it. It's because you don't know how to use electricity and magnetism to do it.
Right.
And so I'm not denying the basic idea of these kinds of things. I'm saying don't expect it to come easy. The fact that it might be true doesn't mean that it won't take another couple centuries of hard work before we can tame it and understand it well enough, to actually use it this way. And if someone, had said, let's get all magnets and electricity generators, they have these things that you can spin by hand to create electricity, and made claims about it, those claims were probably mostly false, right? Not because electricity and magnetism couldn't do it, but because the person wasn't using them correctly. So that's where I think we are. Again, I don't want to rule out all of the effects, but I would say at this point, our understanding of this is so elementary that the chance that we're actually using it, we have a long way to go before we get iPhones and satellites in place so that you can in fact talk with someone on the other side of the earth, right? This is just a whole, it's possible, but it can't be done. And I must say, I have myself tested psi claims in my own lab, and everyone that I've tested has failed, everyone. I'm not saying that psi isn't possible. I'm saying we have to be far more sophisticated about understanding what's going on here. We need a mathematical model of consciousness. We need to have exact understanding about how consciousness maps into space and time. And then we will develop technologies that will look absolutely magical, far more impressive than holding hands and what we think we're doing. It'll be far more impressive than that. We will bend space and time. So in some sense, I'm saying, it's strange what I'm saying. I'm saying probably not. What we're doing right now in these realms isn't working. But what we could do is far beyond what anybody's even imagining. The potential is even greater.
Sure. So conscious experiences. What is the distinction between a conscious experience and a memory, what we call a memory? And would something like a dream, something that we would call non-physical, would that qualify as a piece of space-time or as a conscious experience? I'm having trouble kind of putting that piece together.
Right. So all memories, as you're having them, are experiences that you're having. So recurrent experiences, and then the experience that I recall having that experience, those are all experiences. And so that's going to be an interesting aspect of this whole thing, in which consciousness is fundamental, is to rethink all of these things in terms of a primary system in which conscious experiences are fundamental. We want to think of it in terms in which physical objects are fundamental, and physical objects have certain permanent properties that we can call memory. So instead, it's going to be that there are dynamical networks of conscious agents, and certain dynamical systems will have certain properties that will lead to certain recurrent patterns of experience that we can call memories. And even the notion of a self. I mean, often we talk about memories, you have to have a self that's having the memory. And in the theory I'm developing, a self is not fundamental. A self itself is a construction in our virtual reality. So, and even you mentioned, well, so what about the space that we experience in our dreams? Is that a real space-time? That just shows again that, I mean, if you think about dreams, you're lying there inert, you're not moving, maybe you're wiggling a little bit, but you're immersed in these pretty incredible worlds. And many cases you're flying or you're walking or you're making it all up. It's in the dream, it's clear that everything you've got is a virtual reality. I'm just saying that even when you wake up, it's a virtual reality. That's also a VR. So if you experience a space and time in your dream, that just shows that you are able to be the author of space and time. And I'm claiming you are absolutely the author of all the space and time you've ever encountered. You are. So it's completely different. So most of us think of space and time, right? It began at the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. Space and time have been around for all this. They're the pre-existing stage in which the drama of life plays out. And we're tiny little bit players that have come on 13.8 billion years later. And I'm saying, turn that whole framework around. Space-time is not fundamental. Consciousness is. You're not a bit player on the pre-existing stage of space-time. You are the author of space-time. You're the author of the play, not a little bit player that comes later on the stage of space-time. It's a complete turnaround. So one thing that's really hard in what I'm saying is that it's a bit of a shock to the system. Almost every intuition that's deeply ingrained in us is being fundamentally contradicted by this new point of view. But it's shocking, but it's also fun.
Right.
Maybe it's an acquired taste, but it's a fun taste.
I've been trying to play with this thought in my head since I read your book, just trying to kind of, and what I've come up with, just as a way of telling it to myself, is that if the world around us is sort of let's just call it like a movie, we are the writer of the movie, the audience for the movie, and the director of the movie, and we build the set, and it's all happening at the same time.
That's right. It's pretty impressive. And there are other real players, other conscious agents that are interacting with us, but even what we see, I mean, what I see of you is what I am able to create in terms of what I see of you. And who knows, how I see you and how you see yourself may be utterly different.
So I just read a book by Dr. Jim Tucker. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He did a book on reincarnation. It was just kind of something I came across when I was studying consciousness. And he found that a lot of young children seem to have memories that have been verified, or at least to a degree in which he was satisfied with, and some of his colleagues, that seem to belong to other conscious agents, as you would put them. How does that fit in with your theory, and should we take that seriously?
Well, that kind of thing I can't dismiss out of hand, right? So that doesn't mean that I am saying it's necessarily true, but I'm saying from within my framework, I can't dismiss it out of hand at all. And there is some relevant work that's related to that that I find quite interesting. Dr. Sam Parnia at the Langone Medical Center in New York and others, they had a symposium at the New York Academy of Sciences last November or December. And they're talking about the near-death experiences that they as physicians in emergency rooms deal with. And modern advances in dealing with resuscitation, people have cardiac arrest, and they can be, you know, without a heartbeat for an hour, and they can bring them back in some cases. And they're getting, so with the new medicine, they're getting many cases of people who've had no brainwave for a long time, you know, 20, 30, 40 minutes. And they get consistent stories of, you know, a light tunnel and a life review and all sorts of things where there's no brain activity that would, you know, from a standard neurophysiological point of view, you know, sustain this kind of thinking. So now, as a scientist, of course, I have to be hard-nosed about everything, including and especially my own work, right? So being gullible is not what you want to do. So you want to be hard-nosed. So all of these things I think should be, if you're a physicalist, I would say the probability of reincarnation is pretty much zero, right? If in a physicalist framework. In my framework, it's not zero, but it's not one either. So in my framework, I would really want to do some serious studies on it. I'd also want to study these near-death experiences and try to get more data on them. Ultimately, though, what we're going to have as a scientist, I want a mathematical model of consciousness, this vast network, social network of conscious agents, how it works, how it maps into our perception of space and time, and have that whole thing make sense and ask, does the data that we have about near-death experiences, about reincarnation reports and so forth, how does that fit in this whole framework? That's when, as a scientist, I will be happy or not to say I think that there's something here. But at least right now I can say this, my framework forces me to be open. It doesn't force me to say yes, but it forces me to say we need to look.
Right. That's hey, I'll take that. I'll take that better than blanked out of existence. Right. So, okay, just changing paths a little bit. So we talked about, you know, fitness payoffs a little bit and how evolution seems to reward fitness payoffs, like with the Jewel Beetle being confused as to what it's mating with. Are things like smells and tastes and the things that we would call a conscious experience, are they tuned by evolution too? And the example that I came up with, and this might be a bad example, so feel free to offer up a better one. If a dog is walking down the street, I'm walking my dog Cece, and she stops to smell a hydrant where another dog has peed, that might be good for her to know what predators are around and things like that. It's good for her. I wouldn't stick my nose in there because it's probably not good for me, and also it would be unpleasant. But is that something that evolution can tune? It might smell better to her than it would to me.
Absolutely. So, and there's a big point that needs to be made here, and that is that in answering a question like this, I always have to tell you what theoretical framework I'm using, right? So to answer this question, I'm going to assume a physicalist framework for the moment and evolution by natural selection and try to give an answer to your question in that framework. Now, I've already said that I'm ultimately going to let go of space-time,
right?
And therefore, any theory that's within space-time, including evolution by natural selection, can't be ultimately a final fundamental theory. Nevertheless, it's the best theory we have right now in space-time to answer the kind of question you're asking. So within, and by the way, this is what we have to do as scientists all the time. Yes, if you ask me a question as a scientist, a physicist or a chemist or whatever, I have to say, well, here is the best answer that our best current theoretical framework in science can give us as a physicist or a chemist or whatever. That's all we can do. We should always have the attitude, of course, in 50 years or hopefully next week, we'll have a better theory. Right. And we'll realize the limits of the current theory. But all we can do is say, these are our current best theories right now. I'm not playing light with our theories. We have to study them. We have to understand them because they're the best tools we have. But they're never the final word. There's always going to be a deeper theory. So from the point of view of evolution by natural selection, you're absolutely right. Evolution shapes our senses to just keep us alive. And what keeps a dog alive, what's good for a dog in their niche could be completely different from what's important for a human. And so as the niches vary, the selection pressures for the different kinds of user interfaces will vary. What's universal, it's clear from the mathematics of evolution, and it's a theorem that we've proven, that Chetan Prakash, my collaborator working with me, proved. The probability is 0 that any creature is shaped to see any aspect of the truth. That probability is 0. What we are shaped is to have the right kind of eye candy, ear candy, whatever it might be, that we need to keep us alive. And pee on a fire hydrant is just the kind of nose candy that a dog needs that we don't need.
Right. Okay, that's fair enough. So we're running short on time. So if you need to drop off, feel free. But if we go over, might go a couple minutes.
Sure.
So the one example of how your book has been kind of messing with me. Shortly after I finished, my wife asked me to take out the garbage, and I said, "Don't worry, honey. The garbage is just part of your interface. It's not real." That, of course, didn't go over very well.
Right.
But as I played it off as a lighthearted joke. But as I'm carrying it out, it occurred to me, it really is a part of the interface. It's something that needs to be discarded because it could affect my health if I leave it around, if I stay around it. And for a second, what was a joke turned into almost a moment of enlightenment. So I was wondering if being so immersed in this, if you had any examples of times in which you caught yourself examining the code or whatever, examining your interface, and just noticed something that you could, provide an example of.
Right. Well, it's changing my perceptions completely from top to bottom, right? It's like everybody, most people, I would say, I just assumed I was seeing the truth. It was a real shock to first learn that evolution might not be shaping us that way, and then to realize that no, the evidence is quite to the contrary. And so it's a shock, and now I systematically just recognize that what I'm seeing is just my way of seeing, and what's really going on is something utterly different. It's so I view myself as knowing a lot less than I thought I knew. I when I look at an ant, or even just a drop of water, the drop of water might look incredibly simple to me, but that doesn't mean it's because I'm interacting with something that's incredibly simple. For all I know, I'm interacting with a network of agents that if I could understand what they were doing, I would be completely blown away. And all I get is something that's a little drop of water or a little grain of sand. That's all I can see. But and again, I'm not saying the grain of sand is conscious or has all that stuff inside of it. I'm just saying that's my little user interface. But the thing that is being projected into that little grain of sand in my little simple interface could be something so profound and a consciousness so far transcendent compared to mine that I would bow down and worship it, but all I see is a grain of sand. So that kind of, I'll put it this way, the way it's really affected me is it's truly humbling. It instead of thinking that I'll get a theory, as a scientist, I'll get the theory of everything and I'll be the one person in the universe that finally knows it all. It's gone just the opposite way. It's just like, holy smoke, I know less and less. The more and more I know, the more humbling it is. There are consciousnesses out there that are probably so transcendent I could never even imagine, and probably most of them are. It's truly humbling.
So just a couple more questions if you have time. One thing that blew my mind about your book, and I'm sorry if I don't get the details right, but it sent me down a bit of a rabbit hole. You talked about how a certain amount of information can be stored in space-time, and it's not the volume of space-time, it's the area. And that sort of led me to like the holographic principle and things like that. I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about that for my audience, because I can't.
Right. So this is something that the physicists themselves have discovered. A guy named Bekenstein and then Hawking, who was trying to show Bekenstein was wrong about this and discovered that, no, it was right, that the amount of information, it was first discussed with black holes. The claim was that the amount of information that you could store in a black hole was proportional only to the surface area of the black hole. And Hawking actually proved that that's the case and gave a formula for it. It's one of his favorite formulas, it was. And it's a stunning result. And most of us would think, well, if I've got, suppose I asked you to build a memory for a computer, and you might say, well, one guy has this sphere, and he's going to pull the memory in that sphere, but some other guy has taken that sphere and he's packed 6 smaller spheres inside of it, right? And so they have much less volume than the big sphere because there are all sorts of gaps between the spheres. And you might ask, well, which could hold more information, the big sphere or the 6 smaller spheres? And it turns out the 6 smaller spheres have a little bit more surface area than the big sphere. So if you're a computer designer, you actually should use the 6 smaller spheres, which have roughly half the volume, but they have more area and they can hold more information. So that's the universe we live in. It's not just black holes. It's any region of space they discover, and the argument is this: how much information can you stick into a region of space? Well, as you stick more and more information has degrees of freedom, and therefore mass, and therefore at some point, as you stick more and more information into a small volume of space, you'll get to the point where you create a black hole. So that gives you the limit how much that region of space could hold. It is, the black hole is the limit, because that's now the key thing is, though, that the amount of information in that quote unquote volume just before you create a black hole is much less than the information you can stick into the black hole. So it's counterintuitive, and yet it's also still the case that it's true. That's the universe we live in, and so it's good for people to think about that the amount of information you can stick into a sphere doesn't depend on the volume of the sphere, it depends on the surface area of the sphere. And if that blows your mind, if that you say space couldn't possibly work that way, great. You have to let go of your notion of space. It's not real. Space is just your data structure.
When I read that, that's the moment where I said, this guy's going to win the Nobel Prize someday.
I doubt that.
I hope so. I'd like to end this podcast with something on the lighter side. When you're trying to just get your mind off of all this deep thought and examination of the word, how do you unwind? What is something that you do for leisure to just kind of set your mind free from all this?
Well, a couple of things. My wife is an artist, and she loves nature, so she has a very good influence on me. She gets me out of the geek mode and out into Yosemite and places to hike, and so it's good for me. She got me out just this morning to walk on the beach. So the kind of things I would do a lot less of on my own, I'd just be buried in stuff, books and math and so forth. That's very good. I work out. I do about an hour of exercise every day, but the thing that I do perhaps the most is I do meditate. I meditate, and for me, meditation is simply, there's no rules, there's no pose, there's no posture. It's just silence. And then when noise comes up in the mind, returning back to silence. And that seems to trigger a transformation that I'm still not I don't really understand, but it's not just a minor, let's relax a little bit. It's deeper, as far as I can tell. It's something deeper that's going to a complete restructuring of the personality that I don't yet understand, but it does seem to be real. And it's a humbling experience. It's an experience beyond any mathematics or science or words. It's pure silence. And there's something very, very deep that I don't understand about this relationship between silence, utter silence on the other one hand, and yet thought on the other, but not sloppy thought. We never get rewarded for sloppy thought. That always leads us astray. Precise thought. In science, we find if you're absolutely precise, that's when you really learn something. If you're just messing around, well, you're just messing around. you get misinformation, you fall off cliffs, you do all sorts of weird stuff. So it's a weird thing, and I'm trying to wrap my head around it. We get rewarded for absolute silence or absolute precision of thought, but not for slop in between. And so I spend time in silence, and then when I'm actually thinking, I don't cut myself any slack. I don't want any nonsense. We look back, if we have the benefit of looking back at human history. Nonsense just never works. It's a waste of our time.
Right.
Sloppy ideas, waving your hands. You look back and go, they may have thought that they were having a good time. They were just wasting their time doing that. The real insights, the real progress, the real surprises, the real advances came from absolute precision. And so I spend time in silence, but then precision.
I think one of the shames about what we've done with our culture as human beings is we've gotten away from the importance of truth in the last couple of years. And I really find that, like life, truth finds a way. And I think we're starting to see that right now. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Hoffman. I hope that when you do pull the thread through the needle and figure this whole thing out, that you'll come back on and explain it all to us, how the whole thing works. And for everyone out there who is struggling with this, I urge them to read this book, The Case Against Reality. It came out in 2019 and is absolutely a page turner. Appreciate it, Dr. Hoffman. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Derek.
All right,
Okay.
take care.